Hello, Jan Rybeck.
Hey, Dominic. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for being here. You are
Pleasure.
a master coach. You're an expert in adult human development. Your company is called Edgewise, and I am so just delighted to have this conversation with you today. And we've been interacting, I guess, over the last 6 months or more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did your map?
Yeah, you did my maturity assessment profile, which was an extraordinarily rich experience for me in my own development. And as I think about bringing it to my clients, and we'll talk about this as our subject today is really vertical development and its impact on ourselves and on you as an expert, but your journey. Not so much. This is not a technical conversation today. This is for everyone who watches this to learn a little bit more about vertical development and what it might bring them.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Great.
So
But just because we're talking about vertical development doesn't mean go on.
no, please.
No, you go on. You start.
Well, I was just going to ask, for headline again. This sounds a little jargony, vertical development, and even the term of adult human development, which you've been in since the early '90s. Could you just give us a headline to start us off? Like, what is vertical development?
Well, you'd think vertical development means growing tall. What we mean by vertical development is vertical as opposed to horizontal. And a lot of what we've come to know about development in the leadership development world is skills training, competency development. And that's what we think of as horizontal development. So in other words, you can develop skills, you can learn a lot, and become really good, very skillful at something without necessarily changing your mindset or building your capacity to be able to hold, understand, empathize, respond, have a greater repertoire.
Yes.
To hold, understand, empathize, and respond. So when we talk about vertical, what we're talking about is basically expanding our capacity to be able to be with more, to embrace more, to empathize more. So for example, you could go get trained in how to give feedback. There's certain methods for giving feedback, and you learn the skills, and you learn how to have the kind of conversation where you can, give the good and give the not so easy information and do a feedback conversation. And that would be a horizontal skill that you develop. You could learn how to give feedback and learn how to develop the capacity to actually sit with somebody as they listen to the feedback, as they respond to it, to empathize with what it's like for them, to consider other ways that they might be able to respond, and it'll change you. Sorry, I need to. And it might change you in some ways.
Yes.
Expand your capacity. That's a vertical move.
Okay.
So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. If you stay awake and you let the experience of building a skill actually change you and expand your capacity, that's a vertical move.
Yeah, got it.
Hence,
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, my work with Flourishing Gays is really creating this kind of multifaceted leadership development program for LGBTQ men. And I looked out there like, well, what's available in leadership development? And it is like, oh, let me teach you how to do feedback. Let's work on public speaking. Let's understand the issues facing leaders in a digital world, which are all worthwhile topics, interesting, and there's of course more to learn, and we can all get better at those things. But part of my story, getting to know you, is being drawn to this possibility of expanding humans for who they are.
Yep. Yeah, you're spot on. And one of the reasons why I think vertical development has become so hot now is because we're waking up to the complexity. It's always been a complex world.
Mm.
but we're waking up to the complexity, and it's only accelerating. And one of the things that we're finding is that in order to be with complexity, you have to expand your mindset. You have to expand your capacity to be able to consider more, to hold things lightly so you can entertain different options that you might not have considered before.
Yes.
And that's really what vertical development is about. It's about being able to be with that complexity,
Yes.
move past the lines.
This quote, of, I think Einstein, like that we'll never overcome a problem with the same mindset that created it, or something along those lines, right?
So mindset is a great, I'm glad you used that word. It's a great word to use when we're talking about vertical development, because that's what we're talking about. And by mindset, we're not talking about just what you think. We're talking about your awareness. We're talking about, and awareness happens throughout our entire body. And as we become more aware, wake up, we start noticing that we're taking in information through our skin, through the proprioceptors in our muscles, and how we in mirror neurons and how we relate to others, and learning what's going on around us and how there's interdependence between what's going on outside of us and what's going on inside of us, and there's a constantly um, reflective process going on. So
Yeah.
as we become more awake and more aware, that our mindset expands, so we're able to consider more.
Yeah, you know what is coming available to me when you say that, this we talk about expanding, and it sounds kind of woo-woo, right? Like, oh, expanding
Your
people.
consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm often talking with men, especially about like how we're just here above our necks, and like this is the only part of ourselves that we use to listen or to tune in to what's happening in a room or among a team. And it's like, oh well, we have our heart center, our seat of emotions and care. We have our gut and this kind of intuitive center. There's like literally other parts of ourselves that we're kind of closed off to, by being conditioned, not only as men, but in America, in our culture today, in our modern age. There's such a beautiful lionization of the intellect, but there's much more to ourselves than
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we talk about mindset, and we're actually talking about all of us, but the mind is sort of the collective, how that gets integrated into how we understand, see, experience
Yeah.
ourselves in relationship, others around us, these dynamics.
So I think we're kind of wonking out in some ways. You and I love this stuff so much. And I want to make sure that this conversation is accessible to all kinds of people, to people who are our clients. Like, it's very clear why people like you and I, who are coaches and leadership development as professionals, want to learn about vertical development and get better at this. But why should just kind of normal people who do whatever they do in the world, why should they care about this topic?
Oh, that's a great question. The complexity, I think, is the first thing that comes to mind, because things are much more, they've always been complex, and we're becoming more awake to complexity, and they're becoming more complex. And in that complexity, it means that there's no one right answer. You can't go to a book and say this is the answer. We need to be able to consider different possibilities, and also be open to the iterative process of, we're going to keep working it until we get it right, and we need to stay awake to that. And we can't have our sense of identity attached to this one right way of doing things. So one of the distinctions that comes up in the process of vertical development, some of this, and when we learn more about it, we learn there's actually some stages, some predictable pattern of stages that we move through in vertical development. And there's one place in this journey where we often come up against the distinction of, would you rather be right? Or would you rather be effective?
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's a vertical move. That question can be a vertical move, because if you say, well, what's the difference? That's your work, right? It's all about being right. Being right defines me.
Yeah, if I can't see what the difference is, I'm actually blind to
Yes.
a whole range of possibilities in which, oh, I get the thing done.
Yeah.
It turns out I'm not exactly right, or I'm not right at all.
Right. But what's getting done, and that's what matters. And our identity becomes attached to that rightness.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who I am. And the waking up there might be, and this often happens when you get moved from a technical role to being more into a leadership role, where you realize, oh, well, I might have the right answer, but if nobody's following me, we're not going to get anything done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so being effective actually means I need to bring people along, or they need to understand what we're doing, or I need to build relationships before I need them. And that moves someone into the area of what we know as emotional and social intelligence, which is definitely a vertical move when we're expanding our capacity to consider, well, how do they see things?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, how do they experience it? What do they need to know from me in order to know how to work this?
Yes.
So that's a vertical move, because now I'm getting outside my own sense of identity about being right, and I'm expanding it to say, oh, you know, this is about getting other people on board. I need to build that around me. I need to understand where they're coming from. So I need to listen to them differently.
Mm-hmm. So what, I mean, one of the reasons why people who are, let's say, in the professional world would care or want to, should care perhaps about your vertical development is that it gives some explicit way to understand the kind of growth and learning
Yeah.
that they need to do to as they rise the ladder of responsibility as they start their own entrepreneurial venture, and there's all kinds of things that they didn't have to deal with earlier as just, let's say, a technical.
Spot on. You
Yeah.
know, the way I think of vertical development is it's providing a map, some clarity around the edges, paths, and practices
Hmm.
that can take you further.
Yeah.
Because we just don't, we often don't know, well, what does it mean um to understand people, to empathize better? What is that? What's that? I wouldn't know where to begin. That's an edge. When we
Yeah.
talk about being an edge is where you come up against what you know and realize what you don't know, and you got to cross that chasm. And that's where we think about there's an edge there.
You're giving me this image of like an explorer with
Yes,
her
exactly.
backpack on and her equipment, and like either a blindfold or no map.
Yeah.
It's like do you know, you see what you see and you don't know what's beyond your horizon. It's literally the edge of your
Hegemony. You
yeah.
don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so this is about helping people see, oh, I don't know what I don't know. How am I going to live into this, experience this, so I can get to know it? And a lot of my experiences with vertical development, a lot of the learning is actually going in, stepping into practices,
Mm-hmm.
and you doing these practices, and the practices begin to shape you.
Can you just give one maybe simple example of a practice like that?
Well, so we go back to the stage I was just talking about. Would you rather be right or would you rather be effective? And I think about this one guy, a scientist I worked with, who was brilliant, brilliant, brilliant man. And his work was learning to listen. And he wanted to read all the books he possibly could on how to listen better. And I gave him something. I gave him a chapter from a book, Leadership Agility, a chapter called The Five Eds. And he read the entire book 3 times between our first and second meeting. And he was, darn it, he was going to get this thing right. And you know, when we looked at it, and we realized, and I realized, you know, I don't think you can think your way into listening better.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to trust and practice it. And the way you're going to have to do that is at the beginning of every conversation, start with an open question and don't say anything. Just listen and notice how hard that is. Notice how hard that is. And you do it and see what happens. And, you know, by golly, after, you know, a couple weeks of doing this and knowing how hard it was, and all of a sudden people began to talk with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he began to learn things that he didn't know before,
Mm-hmm.
which changed the way he saw things
Yes.
and changed their relationships. And all of a sudden people were looking at him differently.
Mm-hmm.
So that's at one level. And then at a later stage, we might do something like mindfulness, which is all the rage right now. And it doesn't have to be sitting for 30 minutes every morning. It can be something as simple as taking some breaths and noticing what's going on, and how you might be getting in your own way, and approaching the situation from a different place. So we might introduce some type of a mindfulness practice where you just do it.
Yeah.
And over time that would shift, that will shift the way the world responds to you, and that then responds the way changes the way you respond to it.
Beautiful. Both of those examples show how there's like this dialogical um,
Mm.
dimension. It's like, okay, I do a practice, which is a different from how I usually show up, and then I literally create my world. It's like the world that I'm experiencing it becomes different. There's new stuff that I previously sort of wasn't open to that now, because of this practice, can seep into me.
Yep.
And then I change in interaction with the transformed world that
Yep.
I kind of let in.
Yep. You can't think your way out of something you behaved yourself into.
Yeah. I feel like we could
Yeah.
talk.
So that's one way vertical shows up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go on.
I was just going to say we could like go into these kind of examples and the theory in a way for a long time. You and I, this is fun to explore. But I really want to get to your story.
Oh,
And
my story.
yeah, like how did you get into this yourself? I mean, you know, we're wanting to have impact on other people's journeys, so let's let your journey be one, you know, example.
Well, so before I was a coach, I was a family therapist,
Okay.
and I practiced that for for a while, and I noticed pretty early in my career that of doing this work that um, systems played a pretty big role in our behavior. I often felt like when I was working with kids that by myself without their family involved, it was like doing a parentectomy, I guess I would call it. It was just me and the kid. I wasn't going home with this kid. What good is that? And so we do family stuff, and that was really wonderful and very powerful, and stuff changed quickly. And I love that work when we got into the systems work, but I never really jived with a whole psychotherapeutic model of diagnose and treat. And I felt like there was something very, rather than it being about fixing it felt like there was some innate strength that my clients had, and it was my job to help tap those. Coaching wasn't a profession then. This was back in the 80s. And then I did that for a while, and then started to have having kids, and was helping my husband run his businesses. And I learned pretty quickly, Dominic, that being a family therapist worked really well when you were in business, particularly with your husband. So, I was able to learn a lot about business and see where psychology and business really synced up. And then coaching came around as a profession, and I thought, oh, well, that's what I've been doing. That's exactly what I've been doing, because it's all about assuming that people are whole, that they've got the wisdom inherent in them. It's just our job to help them clear away them up and tap into it, and perhaps think about what's next and what's calling to them. So I jumped in on coaching, and probably I tend to mark things by kids. So we only had 3 kids, so it was our second kid. So Gabe was born, and I launched myself as a coach, and started doing coaching, and then built that, and loved the life affirming element of the work, assuming people were whole, and it was our job together to journey, to help them unpack and perhaps remember those parts of themselves that were more true than they even knew. And then gosh, when was it? I think it was 2004 or something like that, 2005, something. I learned about vertical development. I don't think it was, yeah, it might have been called that. We were calling it, ego construct development or adult stage development. It goes by many different names. But the work of,
at first.
well, so after about a dozen years of doing coaching, I decided to get a coaching credential because there were lots of coaching programs now popping up. And I thought, well, maybe this is a real thing, so I should get a credential. So I went to New Ventures West, and James Flaherty, who was, it was his program, he had a model for vertical development. And he mentioned Susanne Cook Greuter's work in explaining it and the research she was doing. So I went back and looked up her research and thought, wow, I want to learn more about this. So that's how I first learned about Suzanne's work. And I was taken by it. And I don't know why, other than it just made sense. And it seemed to go deeper than anything else I had learned. And there was something in me that yearned for that depth. The idea being that as we evolve in adulthood and change in adulthood, the way we do that or grow is how we make sense of things, our mindset, our ability to, take in more information and shift the ways we make sense, the lines that we use to both define and limit ourselves.
As you say this, I can't help but understand or imagine that there was something going on in your own development at that moment in 2005 that's like, it was the right moment for you to learn this and go there. It was a tendril, as they say in the field, like reaching to the next thing for yourself.
Yeah, I think my soul was asking for a path to help me on. And, I think if I think about what was going on for me then, I remember I had a client once who at the end of our engagement, she said, this was really powerful. I'm curious, why do you do this work? What is it about this work? And I said, well, it's the closest thing I can do to being a parent that pays well. And it's not because I'm a mom to my clients. I don't parent my clients. I don't see myself in that way. But it's because as a mom, as a parent, I feel like my job is to track with my kids and to certainly love them, but not to hold them back, to hold them, but not hold them back, to create a space for their unfolding. And at the same time, know when I have to just lighten the edges of that space, to let them emerge, to just know how to hold that space. And the whole experience of childbirth was very powerful for me in that way. The whole idea of I became very unimportant and inconsequential in the process because there was something that was moving through me that was very powerful. And I never wanted to lose that experience of being a partner with God and giving birth to the next, whatever that is. And so I think of coaching and I think of the unfolding that we talk about when we talk about vertical development is similar in that way, in that we're both holding and letting go at the same time. It's a paradox, if that makes any sense, of holding the space and also knowing when to just breathe and let what wants to emerge.
One thing I know about my life for certain, I will never give birth to a baby with the body that I have. But this metaphor of birth has been powerful for me in thinking of midwifing. That's how I sometimes regard my work with clients. And sometimes you have to really intervene. And sometimes you just catch the baby, or sometimes you might stroke their head, and calm them, or other times like, okay, big push, or breathe through the nose, or, or just hold their hand.
Oh, you'd be a great midwife. Absolutely. That's exactly. And it is the process of being in partnership.
Yes.
with the unknown, with the mysteries.
Yes. Yes.
That's the thing that
Yes.
when I tap into what calls me to this work is that feeling of being in relationship with that
Yeah.
unfolding, and
Yeah.
having it not be about me.
Yeah. I mean, this process of generation is bigger than the mother, than the baby, than of course the midwife. It is a
Yeah,
process that's moving through, and each has a super important role to play in that moment. But it is freaking mysterious. Like what? Another human, another person, another being, another animal is coming out of this one?
yeah,
Huh?
yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah. And we don't get to know. We don't always get to know. Um, we might get to experience.
Yes. And I guess vertical development in some ways is a way that we give birth to another self. We're both the mother and the baby as we birth our newly expanded version of ourselves.
Mhm.
And that's like this a metaphor of the Russian doll with like
Yeah,
the different stages, all of course still inside. They don't go away, but there is a birth each time we move a major paradigm of our mindset, let's say.
yeah, yeah. We're always what's the next edge? How
Yeah.
do I live into that edge? And as you live into that edge, it just becomes more you just grow more capacity.
Yes.
And by capacity, that means you can still visit these earlier stages. We know what it's like. We know what it's like to be in an expert or achiever stage and have it be really important. And sometimes in our lives, we need to be in that way of functioning, that mindset, because that's what the situation's asking. We know how to do it, but we can also expand past that because we've lived out into those edges
Yes.
and are not afraid, or not, or perhaps know, or just are practiced at being there.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's how I got into this work. Then I went and got trained to score the map, which was a couple year process of deepening in the rigor of it.
And that's a
Um,
tool that Susanne Cook
was
Greuter
on.
developed. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's other folks who do it. It's based on material that out of the Washington University Sentence Stem Completion. So Suzanne has an assessment, and a couple other groups have similar assessments. So, there aren't too many. There's a couple games in town around this.
Mhm.
Suzanne's, I think, happens to be particularly rigorous in terms of learning how to score, which means you get a deep grounding in the framework, the theory behind it, which was developmental in its own way.
Yes.
Uh,
And I want to hear about that developmental process as you got more and more expert over these years. And if you're willing, I'd love to bring that to the area of identity. In
mm,
gender. I mean, we've been talking about your being a mother, and
mhm.
to some degree about being a wife. Uh,
It's implied in there.
yeah. And like, okay, so gender, race,
Race.
nationality, of course, sexual orientation is something that I'm very interested in doing Flourishing Gays. Like, how has your learning in vertical development impacted your sense of self along some of these dimensions?
Oh, yeah, wow. And that's a question that is so hard for me to answer from my head, because what is so clear to me is that um, it's very hard to get out. I can't deny, like I said, our identities both define and limit us,
Yes.
both. And so, I can't deny the lens or the way of being and the choices and the life that's come to me through being a white heterosexual woman, mother who was able to give birth and all that. And at the same time, I am so aware of how those are just lines. And as we grow vertically, vertically, those lines, at least my experience is those lines become fainter.
Mm-hmm.
I see them as lines, but the lines are almost like chalk lines on the sidewalk after a rainstorm, and they're there. And I realize that they allowed me to work in a certain way and be in a certain way. And they also separate me. And in that separation is pain. I think in our divisions, I think as we are, and the more we see separateness in others, the more we feel separateness in ourselves. And I think that's a form of suffering.
Can you exemplify that? Like, I don't know, with whiteness or with being a woman, or can you just help us understand that a little bit more?
Um, that you know, how can I explain it? So that well, the old, I think it was Tennyson who said, I am all, I am part of all that I meet. But if I don't really know, if I really don't have a sense of their experience, how can I know myself?
Mm.
It's a non-duality. I mean, ultimately, what where we're going with this vertical development is to the sense of non-duality, that we're all part of this whole experience.
Mm-hmm.
And how you are is how I, it affects how I am too.
Mm-hmm.
And in not having a sense of that in my own being, I suffer.
Mm-hmm.
We all suffer without feeling connected into our own oneness. There's a wonderful teaching from Judaism that that I think of, almost daily, where it's the idea of being that when before before at the very early times of creation, there was just God.
Mm.
There was just God, and God's light, God's power was so huge, was so powerful that um, it burst through any vessel that tried to hold it.
Mm.
And what you had all over were these shards,
Mm.
pieces of vessels that had tried and failed to contain the brilliance that was this abundance. And our job here on earth is to piece those shards together,
Mm.
one edge at a time,
Mm.
bringing them together so we can hold a little bit more of the abundance of the light, that's there. And so that's where I think what is fuels this work for me more than anything else is that the more we can learn to hold the lines, to see the lines, recognize them because they define us and they're holy in that way, and also hold them lightly,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to see, understand, empathize, respond from a place of care and compassion to the reality of others and what that is inside of us. The more we can do that, the more those lines begin to, they're not going to go away, but they don't fade, and they don't hold us back.
Yes. Where this has taken me is the microcosm, macrocosm. Like those lines, those shards are as much inside my own fragmentation.
Mm-hmm.
My gay self and my straight self,
Mm-hmm.
my little boy and my old man.
Mm-hmm.
And as I can piece those together, my inner womanness, my feminineness, my and yes, my manliness and my masculinity. Like
Mm-hmm.
as I can bring those shards together in here,
Mm-hmm.
there is a, I don't know, I mean, tikkun olam. There's like a repairing of the world. This is, this beautiful Hebrew phrase that is so important in Jewish thought. As I do my work, I am helping do the work of the cosmos, the universe, the world.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's a little bit that we can do, and it's once you see it, how can you not do it?
Yes, yes.
And what this vertical work does is it allows us to break it down to the little pieces that are immediately doable.
Yes.
Right there in front of us.
Yes.
So if it's
feathers holding us back and those little tendrils reaching forward.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, you got it.
Well, I'm sure that many of our viewers are now very keen to learn more and go with their own vertical development. What's your guidance? What's your suggestion for folks who would like to go somewhere with this work? What's your advice on how, like, what resources they might go to, or steps they might take for themselves?
So the place where I just went about the non-duality and the vertical and the God stuff is usually not what we talk about.
Yeah.
In the workspace, right? So that's that's kind of underneath it all. What it's about for me. There's a lot of different ways to do this. So the maturity or mindful mindset assessment profile that we did together is one tool, and that's a sentence stem completion assessment that certified scores like myself, and you get a report, and we do a coaching session around it. So that's what you're familiar with, and there's a couple other assessments that are like that out there. And that's probably the most robust way to really understand the mindset, the stage of mindset that you're most often inhabiting, that you tend to bring to the world. And once you understand that, then there's ways that we can look at, well, so then what's the edge? How does this both define you, and what's precious about that, and what do we want to uphold there? And then how that might get in your way. What's the limiting there? And so, and there's known practices that link to different stages. So there's a good way to use that to define the work. There's certainly 360s like the Leadership Circle, which is a great one that gets at reactive and creative tendencies, which also speak to what degree are we opening to what's possible or holding ourselves back with our limited ways of thinking and being. So that's a 360 that's useful, particularly in a workplace environment. Another way is to work with a developmentally focused coach. And coaches who are trained in, so this is also called developmental coaching is another term, or an integral coach often works with one of these frameworks too. And developmentally focused coach will help you identify what the mindset is, the sense making that you bring, and once again, how that's both defining and perhaps holding you back or limiting what's possible. That work tends to be deep. For some people, it can feel almost like therapy, although we're not looking at it as healing. Healing can happen through the process, but we're not coming at it from a place of someone needing to be fixed or healed. And I just can't understate the importance of some type of mindfulness practice, even if it's walking in the woods.
Yeah.
Help wake us up.
Yeah. Yeah, in a way, this is all about living wakefully.
Yep.
And living dynamically with some self-observation, self-noticing as we see ourselves, we see the territory, and we have a map of what that territory might be as we continue to explore it on this journey called life.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Love it.
Jan Rybeck, thank you so much for this conversation. I've certainly learned a lot and enjoyed it. Um, really a pleasure to explore this territory with you.
Oh, yeah, it's been great. Just a real pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm just so frustrated I can't hug you.
Well, the age of COVID has its
Yeah, it'll happen.
signs. It's a shard. There's just a limitation between the
Hard. Yes.
two. All right. Well,
All
thank
right.
you. Let's leave it there for
Pleasure.